Sleater-Kinney, The Woods. The Woods. Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, internet's busiest music nerd. Classic review, let's go. The Woods was the 7th full-length album from American rock trio Sleater-Kinney. Originally, this thing came out in 2005 via Sub Pop Records. For years, many thought it to be the band's swan song record until they had basically reformed and dropped a follow-up album 10 years later, the album No Cities to Love, a pretty decent no BS indie rock record. But back in 2005, The Woods seemed like an epic moment of finality for a band that didn't really give a strong reason for hanging up their instruments the next year. And over the 10 plus years the band had been performing and dropping albums up to that point, Sleater-Kinney had become a pretty essential part of the burgeoning American indie rock scene, which was then just starting to see some major commercial success. And a big part of what made Sleater-Kinney stick out from other bands cut from the indie cloth was their gutsy, unapologetic attitude and sound that was hugely inspired by many Riot Grrrl bands that came before them. Their very trebly and crunchy dual guitar, no bass sound certainly contributed to that, as well as frontwomen Carrie Brownstein and Corin Tucker both taking on vocal duties, and both brandishing these shouty, sharp, and in-your-face singing voices that rang like sirens. Even though for many people the aggressive and also sour quality of Kinney's sound may be initially off-putting, like many other great rock bands, they push you out of your comfort zone, and their abrasive demeanor eventually ends up being what pulls you in. Some of the band's past records are more palatable than others, but most of them are pretty no-frills, especially their self-titled debut and Dig Me Out. But The Woods was a much different animal for Sleater-Kinney. It was much noisier and gnarlier. It's not a sludge metal album or anything like that, but Carrie and Corin and Janet on this record were working with more layers and distortion and effects than I think they have on any previous record. All of the sounds the band was pursuing on this record was a pretty bold move away from the raw and organic and very dry style that had been their calling card up until that point. Even all the way up to more recent releases on the Kill Rock Stars label like All Hands on the Bad One and One Beat. Now, most likely this was due in part to switching producers on The Woods over here to Dave Friedman, known for his work with the Flaming Lips, with Mogwai, Sparkle Horse 2, as well as Mercury Rev, who he also played bass for. Point is that these are artists that aren't exactly known for keeping their sounds simple. And making this change did create an interesting result in Sleater-Kinney being able to maintain this organic, raw performance style while still creating a pretty varied and dynamic sound. The drums on this thing are pretty heavy and booming. The guitars certainly have more separation in that some of them were EQ'd to have way more bass, so they would kind of suffice for a bass part in a given track. And The Woods wasn't just a change in the way that Sleater-Kinney was recorded though, because certainly on this record they were writing and performing with more ambition than ever too. And on occasion with these songs, kind of looking to the past for inspiration. The song What's Mine Is Yours is like a tart piece of stomp rock. Everything about the track, the riffing, the pacing, it feels really old school, almost like a classic rock song or something. All of it except for the very brash and abrasive attitude, as well as the mirror-shattering vocals. There's even something about some of the lyrical phrasing on this track that feels like it's been lifted straight out of an old blues song. Someone's in the kitchen, cooking hearts over the stove. The song Steep Air sounds like an enraged and kind of demented take on the dramatic hard rock forged by bands like Led Zeppelin. The following track, Let's Call It Love, seems to pull from that same era of inspiration, but it's an 11-minute monster. Nowhere near as catchy or brief as a lot of the other songs on here. The track is really an edge-of-your-seat thrill ride with wailing guitar leads and exploding drums, psychedelic effects blaring away in both channels. Never before has Sleater-Kinney sounded so simultaneously lost in the moment but also crushing. This track also transitions pretty seamlessly into the closing cut Nightlight, which is kind of a calm after the storm but is still mired by a lot of these feelings of moodiness and tension that carry out through much of The Woods. It's undoubtedly an angry album, but I don't think it points its anger in the same way that most pissed off albums do, at some kind of faraway point or effigy or idea. In the case of The Woods, it sounds like existing as a band and maybe even just recording this album itself is what's pissing the band off. Either that or Carrie, Corin, and Janet have essentially said to themselves, what, over the years we haven't been loud enough and in your face enough and bold enough? So it's like for themselves, they're raising the bar and then rocketing over it. So to take it back to the start of this LP, The Fox, there is not a volume you can play this track at where it does not sound deafeningly loud. Janet's drums pop like gunshots. Carrie and Corin's guitars roar like heavy machinery. The lead vocals are wailing harder than ever. And the heavier passages on this cut contrast nicely with these woozy guitar chords set against this kind of ominous story of a nefarious fox breaking a naive duck's heart. It's like a bitter twist story, romantic allegory made out of a kid's story. The song Wilderness almost grooves as if it's an old school post-punk throwback, with a somewhat weird dance beat and these very well-defined staccato guitar notes and phrasings. Meanwhile, the lyrics of the song tell a story of a couple trying to get on with their lives, move on to the next chapter, but their love for each other is kind of dissolving before their very eyes. And neither come out looking all that good, especially with lyrics like a two-headed brat tied to the other for life. I also love the song Rollercoaster for its equally peppy guitar licks. One of the only tracks on this entire LP I would dare call cute. The lyrics on this one for me read like they're coming out of a place of pure lust and infatuation, driving someone into a relationship with somebody that they eventually just get bored of, like it was just a bad idea to begin with. Meanwhile, the song itself sounds like you're stuck on a carnival ride when it suddenly gets super booming and distorted in the middle third. Between all the noise on this track and the woo background vocals, it sounds like a Waves album before a Waves album even existed, kind of like Sleater-Kinney was there first to the lo-fi indie craze of the late 2000s. The song Jumpers is a bit more quiet and introspective than a lot of other songs on this record, but no less tense and hard-hitting in the grander scheme of things. The song features these chilling, in-unison lead vocals. Our protagonist in the song is wanting to commit suicide because of this really lonely and isolated city life that she leads. I legitimately find the end of this track to be pretty frightening. Meanwhile, the song Modern Girl is a pretty toned-down, simple, raw, Velvet Underground-ish ballad with very twangy and plain guitars, very rudimentary accompaniment. There's a simple beauty to it that I love a lot, and believe me, at this middle point of the record, this breather is very much needed. The song Entertain is easily one of the catchiest songs the band has ever written. It's also a pretty interesting critique of commercial entertainment and the retro trends in rock music at the time. It's kind of funny the band was complaining about this in the 2000s, because I wonder what they would think about it today, especially with lyrics like, you come around looking 1984, you're such a bore, 1984 nostalgia, you're using it like a whore, it's better than before, it's better than before. It's also kind of curious considering there are parts of this album that feel like a little bit of a throwback, though I would argue Sleater-Kinney does a good job of updating these ideas and sounds. Though there's definitely an intentionally indecisive push and pull to some of the lyrics of this track. Go away, don't go away, look away, no please, don't look away. Also, some of the pre-chorus sections on this track, as well as the whoa whoa background vocals, feels like something straight out of like a 70s rebellious punk song. But as scattershot as the point of this song may be, I do think Sleater-Kinney comes through with some strong ideas, especially in regards to making safe art, making safe music, conformity, buying into whatever lie commercial entertainment is often trying to sell you. There's also a really strong sentiment of rejection and opting out being voiced on this track that I think may have also driven the band to their ultimate decision to go on hiatus for as long as they did. A hiatus that I'm definitely glad ended, which I think is a pretty good closing sentiment to round this review up on. So all in all, in my opinion, The Woods, one of the better rock albums of the 2000s, regardless of subgenre. Not a single song on this thing that I'm not impressed by, not a single element of it that I don't think is incredibly bold to some degree, whether it be the vocal delivery, the textures, the production, the performances, some of the topics, the personality, especially the volume. And I love how the band was essentially able to evolve so quickly and creatively on this LP, challenge themselves, challenge their listeners, and create a really well-written album that is a crossroads of many different styles of underground rock, whether we're talking about indie rock and punk rock, or garage and psych stuff, or noise rock. Totally badass record, period. one of the most essential rock albums of the 2000s, and we're going to leave it at that. Those are my thoughts. Hopefully you've checked this album out as well. If you have not, please do. Transition, have you given The Woods a listen? Did you love it? Did you hate it? What would you rate it? You're the best, you're the best. What should I review next? Hit the like if you like. Please subscribe and please don't cry. Hit the bell as well. Over here next to my head is another video that you can check out. Hit that up or the button to subscribe to the channel. Anthony Fantano, Sleater-Kinney, The Woods, forever.